Streaming only on Peacock.
John Wayne Gacy killed 32.
Straight from the killer's mouth.
They want you to believe that I alone committed these murders.
The new gripping 6-part documentary series, John Wayne Gacy, Devil in Disguise. All episodes streaming now, only on Peacock.
This is CBS Eye on the World. I'm John Batchelor, visiting with Behnam Ben Talebo, Senior Fellow of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. We're discussing Iran. There are so many stories going in different directions. I've learned to trust none of them, but to pay attention to a trend. And the trend is hostility and provocation over these last months of the Biden administration. Now we have a report that the newly elected president of Iran, Raisi, a man associated with terrorism for a long time and linked to provocations to murder. He was called the hanging judge. That indicates what the Iranian people think of him. He has said there will be no negotiations, no advancement until he's in power and Rouhani is gone. However, Behnam, what does this mean that we're going to negotiate with the hanging judge? And what do we expect from a man who says, I won't talk about missiles, I won't talk about provocations, I only want the sanctions lifted and the money? What do we do?
Well, if past is prologue, and if this Democratic administration is operating like the past Democratic administration, then it will be a collapse of the U.S. position. Going into the previous talks that got us the 2013 and the 2015 nuclear deal, the U.S. had a united consensus global position backed by 5 UN Security Council resolutions that sought to prohibit any enrichment on Iranian soil. What did the Iranians do? They went from 0 to 3 to 5% purity to 20% purity, just so that they could grandfather in a deal that gives them up to 5% purity. They're doing the same thing here. Raisi is more lethal, of course, when you look at his background and his willingness to murder in cold blood. That doesn't mean that Rouhani is a moderate. It means that just Rouhani had a different background. Rouhani, of course, worked in Iran's security establishment, Supreme National Security Council, was a former nuclear negotiator, and thought he could hoodwink Washington. I think Raisi, given his more clearly bloodstained past and service in Iran's judiciary, kind of working his way up the ladder there, and the kind of intellectual milieu and the cadre of revolutionaries that he is cut from, what a Raisi at the helm means is that the final piece of the puzzle of Iran being comfortable with escalation, about no longer needing to put lipstick on a pig, about demanding sanctions relief rather than hoodwinking you for sanctions relief. That, I think, will be the trend moving forward. Obviously, the real decider inside the country is not the president, but a man whose title is meant to be taken rather literally, supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. This man will decide if Iran presses further on the gas or on the brakes. And while the economy is hurting, Iran is still doing things to generate revenue illicitly. It is still illicitly exporting oil. There are rises in Iranian oil exports, for instance. Iran feels comfortable putting its oil on tankers and letting it sit out there on the seas. Iran feels comfortable engaging in what the industries call STS, ship-to-ship transfers. Ultimately, the Iranians are getting ready for a collapse of the U.S. position. And if, again, past this prologue, prior to the collapse, there's an Iranian escalation. So maybe Khamenei, the supreme leader, wants Raisi, the incoming new president, to step on the gas a bit, to play to his base, to play to his instincts, and to ultimately spook Washington into yet another concession.
The enemy gets a vote, yes, but so do the good guys. Benny Gantz, the defense minister of Israel, has been quoted in these last days saying that Israel must prepare for a nuclear Iran. The word prepare is ambiguous on purpose. However, the suggestion here is that if Israel's preparing, the Gulf is preparing. The whole region is preparing. We have long speculated about a nuclear arms race in the Gulf. To your knowledge, is that now part of the conversation, routinely part of the conversation, if Iran is successful in restoring the JCPOA, lifting the sanctions, getting the money, and continuing its predation?
The question, if that situation does occur, is where is Washington amid all of this? Is Washington getting the JCPOA to restore some kind of odd regional balance that it thinks it needs to impose on the greater Middle East? Or is it, and I believe the second one here, or is the JCPOA the last U.S. card to play to begin to divorce itself from the region, to basically to say a plague upon both your houses, and then move towards this much kind of bipartisanly lauded talk of under Obama. It was called Pivot to Asia. Under Trump, it's great power competition. We're waiting for the proper paradigm under Biden. But basically to say the Middle East, the CENTCOM area of operations is not worth it. The Pacific is where it's at. The countering the rise of China is where it's at. And resources, men, money, time, and attention should be spent there. This is what I think the Biden administration is pursuing the JCPOA for. I think it's a fool's errand. Ultimately, someone who cannot counter and contain Iran and its proxies, which are a much smaller scale in the heartland of the Middle East, it's going to be a very big open question as to how they can counter and contest a rising China in any kind of potential million of nightmare scenarios, such as a potential invasion of Taiwan, for instance, or an escalation of the trade war, intensification of the cyber war, or continued hedging and testing in the Pacific. So it certainly raises a lot of questions. And the allies have been seeing this, and the allies have talked. Have actually done more than talk, I should say. The Saudis, for instance, have looked to China to develop a robust domestic ballistic missile program. Right. In the past, they've bought a ballistic missile from the Chinese, a nuclear-capable ballistic missile, I should say. Ultimately, now there's been reporting, I think, from 2019 about Chinese support to a solid propellant plant inside Saudi Arabia. Solid propellant is basically how you can develop a battlefield-ready, a battlefield-capable ballistic missile. It has greater military advantages than liquid propellant. There's also been talk about support.
You're creating nightmares, Benham. We have enough nightmares. You're writing first chapters and more thrillers. We'll return to this, I promise. Good heavens. It's summertime. It's Benham Ben Taleblu of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy. The JCPOA remains in the balance, the fog of war. This is CBS Eye on the World. I'm John Batchelor.
You're listening to CBS Eye on the World with John Batchelor.
Keep up with Team USA with gig speeds over Wi-Fi from Xfinity. Can your internet do that?
Restrictions apply. Not available in all areas. Requires gig internet and compatible gateway. Gig speed Wi-Fi is shareable across all devices. Actual speeds vary and are not guaranteed.
Xfinity, proud partner of Team USA.
Streaming only on Peacock. Ghislaine Maxwell had it all until she met Jeffrey Epstein.
Ghislaine Maxwell's charged with enticement of minors, sex trafficking of children, and perjury.
Epstein's Shadow, Ghislaine Maxwell. Streaming now, only on Peacock.